I still remember the exact moment she said it. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my cardigan draped over my shoulders and the tea just beginning to cool in my mug. My hands trembled a bit that morning, more than usual. My joints had been acting up again from the cold spell. Emily, my daughter-in-law, stood at the sink drying a plate while humming along to whatever soft pop station. She always played. Then she stopped humming. She turned around, looked me right in the eyes, and said, "I don't need a sick mother-in-law slowing things down around here. You've been here long enough." At first, I didn't quite process it. Thought maybe I misunderstood her tone or that it came out wrong. So I smiled and asked her to repeat it. She did, but slower. "I don't need a sick mother-in-law. Get out. Hold on a moment before we move forward. Let us know where in the world you're watching from. And if you're loving these stories, don't forget to hit subscribe. Tomorrow's episode is going to be absolutely mind-blowing." I glanced toward the hallway, expecting my son, Mark, to say something, to intervene, to defend me. He had been in the living room folding laundry, and I knew he had heard it. But he didn't say a word. I waited, sitting in that chair with my cardigan slipping off my shoulder and my knees throbbing from the cold tiles under my feet. Mark walked into the kitchen, handed Emily a folded towel, and just looked at me. No warmth, no shame. Stuff? Kind of look people give a stray dog that keeps showing up. It wasn't sudden, I guess. Not really. The signs were there for months. The quiet irritation when I forgot something small at the grocery store. The way Emily rolled her eyes when I asked for help with the stairs, or the whispering I caught through the walls at night. But nothing prepares you for hearing those words. Nothing makes it feel less personal when your own child watches. You get discarded like a broken appliance. Still, I didn't argue. I didn't ask why or beg to stay. I didn't even cry. I went to the bedroom they let me use that used to be their guest room and packed what I could fit into one tote bag. I left behind my winter coat because it wouldn't fit. I left the little photo frame of my husband on the nightstand. I left my slippers, too, even though my feet were always cold. Emily handed me $4 in cash. "Bus fare," she said. I nodded. I didn't ask where I was supposed to go. She didn't offer anywhere. I walked out the door and down the street. I didn't even hear the door close behind me. It was like I had never lived there. The sun was still high, but the wind was sharp. I wrapped my cardigan tighter around my chest and walked the 4 blocks to the gas station near the bus stop. I stood outside for a while, pretending to check schedules, though there were none posted. I didn't know what I was waiting for. Maybe a change of heart. Maybe just enough courage to board a bus without knowing where it was taking me. I walked into the gas station eventually, more out of cold than direction, and stood near the coffee machine for warmth. I spent one of the dollars on a lukewarm cup of coffee and took the seat by the window. Nobody asked me why I was there or if I needed help. That night, I slept in the corner booth of a 24-hour diner 3 blocks away. The waitress, a young girl named Janelle, didn't say anything when I ordered a cup of hot water and nothing else. She just kept refilling it every hour or so and never once asked me to leave. I folded my cardigan behind my head and closed my eyes for short bursts of sleep. The next morning, my knees were so stiff I could barely stand. I made my way back to the gas station for warmth and sat down again with my last dollar in my hand. There were scratch-offs next to the counter. Cheap ones, the kind people buy on impulse and toss in the trash when they lose. I didn't buy one. I didn't want to waste the last thing I had. I just held that last bill and stared at the lottery machine for a long time. Eventually, I opened my bag to get a tissue, and that's when I found it. An old faded lottery ticket folded up in the bottom. I must have tucked it in my Bible weeks ago and forgotten all about it. I hadn't bought it. I hadn't spent a dime on myself in months. Mark had picked it up on his way home once and left it on the kitchen table. Lucky number 7, he'd joked. That was 6 weeks ago. I smoothed out the paper and looked at the numbers. For a second, I thought about throwing it away. What were the odds? But I didn't. Instead, I took a deep breath and walked over to the machine in the corner of the gas station to ticket scanner. Beeped once, then twice. Then a message flashed across the screen that made my knees give out entirely. Jackpot winner, $1,000. Oh. My hands shook. My breath caught. I dropped the ticket, picked it up, dropped it again. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there, 67 years old, sore and cold, with 2 wrinkled bills in my pocket, and realized my life had just split in 2. Nobody else in the store noticed. Nobody clapped. The world didn't stop. But mine did. And just like that, everything changed. But I wouldn't go back to that house. Not yet. Not even with $1 million in my pocket. They thought I was nothing. They thought I'd disappear. Let them keep thinking that for now. I didn't cash the ticket right away after I scanned it. I just stood there. The man behind the counter, Pete, a guy I'd seen a few times while buying coffee, looked up from his newspaper and said, "You all right, ma'am?" I nodded. "Yes, I'm fine, just tired." He nodded back, didn't press. I slipped the ticket into the inside pocket of my tote bag, zipped it shut, and sat back down in the corner by the window, just like nothing had changed. My coffee had gone cold, but I didn't throw it away. I wasn't ready to move yet. I needed to think. I had nowhere to go. And suddenly I had more money than I'd ever seen in my life. That kind of shift doesn't happen easily. The first thing I did was walk to the public library. It was just down the block, and it was quiet. I used one of the public computers and searched for information about how to claim a lottery ticket in Illinois. The website said you had to go in person to the regional claim center and bring identification. I had my ID, but I knew better than to walk in with that ticket and my real name and let the whole thing be traced back to Mark and Emily. I didn't. Want them to know? Not yet. Maybe not ever. I sat at that computer until my back ached and my eyes burned. Then I searched something else. Can you claim a lottery ticket through a trust? Turns out you can . And that's when everything started falling into place. I didn't know the first thing about setting up a trust, but I read enough to understand that it was possible. It would keep my name off public record. That's what I wanted. Quiet. Distance. I stayed at the shelter that night. I didn't tell them anything. I just used a fake last name when I signed in and thanked the woman who handed me a blanket. The next morning, I went back to the library, printed off everything I needed to set up a blind trust, and started calling lawyers who specialized in that sort of thing. Most of them never called me back, but one did. Her name was Andrea Gordon. And when I explained over the phone that I had a sensitive situation involving a large ticket, she said, "Come in, and bring the original with you." Her office was in a quiet strip mall next to a tax prep center and a dry cleaner. Nothing fancy. That suited me just fine. When I walked in, I was still wearing the same sweater and the same shoes from the day Emily threw me out. Andrea didn't flinch. She offered me water, closed the door, and let me sit for a while before speaking. When I showed her the ticket, she didn't blink. She just nodded and said, "Okay, let's make sure this stays quiet." She explained everything, how we'd set up a trust under a neutral name, how the claim would be filed on behalf of that trust, and how I'd remain anonymous legally. I could receive the funds in a protected account, and no one, not my son, not my daughter-in-law, not anyone could access it unless I allowed them to. I asked her to call the Illinois Lottery Commission on my behalf. 3 days later, it was confirmed, the ticket was valid, the money was real, and the claim was being processed. She handed me a new phone, prepaid with only her number saved. She told me not to use my old phone or bank cards anymore. That was fine. I didn't have either one. When I walked out of Andrea's office, the wind felt different on my face. It wasn't warm, but it didn't bite like it had before. I stayed at the shelter another night, then 2 more. They asked no questions. I did chores when I could. I kept quiet. By the end of the week, Andrea called me back. "It's done. The money is secure. You can use it now however you like." I didn't rush to spend a dime. I asked her to help me set up a small apartment in a town 2 counties away. Not a fancy one. It's clean, safe, with good heating and a lock on the door. She arranged everything, lease, utilities, even a fresh set of clothes waiting in the closet. I moved in with nothing but the tote bag and a new coat Andrea had sent in. My size? I didn't ask how much it cost. I didn't want to know. For once, I didn't have to count change or skip medication to make rent. It felt strange. The place was small. Just a 1-bedroom above a bakery. The windows overlooked the alley, not the street, but I didn't mind. I liked the smell of bread in the mornings. It reminded me of home, before Mark grew up and stopped calling me mom and started calling me her. I took my time settling in. I made tea in the mornings, took short walks when the weather allowed, and watched old TV shows in the evenings. I started writing things down in a notebook. Not big things, just how I felt when I woke up, what I remembered from the old house. The way Emily looked at me when she thought I wasn't watching, I didn't feel like I needed revenge. Not yet. What I felt was something else, a kind of heaviness that sat on my chest even as my feet rested on clean floors. Andrea sent someone to help me open a new checking account under the trust's name. I had a debit card now, a real one. No one else had access to it. One afternoon, I got curious and looked up my old address online. Zillow said the house was still in their name. But I remembered something Andrea mentioned when I gave her the address for my ID renewal. Technically, this deed is still linked to your name, she'd said. Did they ever buy it from you? I had inherited that house from my sister. I let Mark and Emily move in because Mark had lost his job and they had no money for rent. The deal was they'd pay utilities and keep it up. I never charged them rent, never asked for a dime. But they never transferred ownership either. That had always stayed in my name. I had forgotten about that. Andrea hadn't. She had filed the paperwork to retake full legal possession quietly through the trust. And by the end of the month, the property title had been moved into a new LLC. It belonged to me again, fully, and they didn't even know. They probably still thought I was on a bus somewhere, living off scraps, waiting for someone to take me in. They probably told their friends I was unstable or senile, that I had wandered. Often they didn't know how to find me. Good. Let them think it. I spent most of December adjusting to the new life. I bought myself a second pair of shoes. I started going to this small community center near my apartment. They had a senior lunch every Wednesday and weren't too nosy. I used a different last name. Nobody blinked. Sometimes. In the quiet of the apartment, I'd think about Mark as a boy, how he used to crawl into bed when he had nightmares. How he'd cry when he scraped his knees and asked me not to tell his dad. Somewhere along the line, that boy turned into someone I didn't recognize. Emily had taken the lead, sure, but Mark let her. That's what stayed with me most. He let her say those things to me. He let her push me out. He stood there, and now they were living in a house that no longer belonged to them. One they didn't know was already being prepared for sale. Andrea had found a buyer already, cash offer. No inspection needed. It would go through in January. She said, "You'll never need to see it again, but maybe I would not for closure, not for drama, just once." To see their faces when they realized who really owned the key. The paperwork finalized on a Monday. Morning. Andrea called me around 10:30 and said, "It's done. The house is now officially listed under the trust and the sale is scheduled for next month. I've already spoken to the buyer's agent. They're moving fast." I didn't say anything right away. She waited. Then I asked, "Do they know yet?" "Not yet," she replied. "They'll be notified through mail and served in person within a few days. It'll be official. We're not doing anything illegal. It was never transferred to their name. You allowed them to live there." "That's all." I nodded. Even though she couldn't see me, she added, "You don't have to be involved. You don't have to speak to them, see them, or answer anything. I'll handle it all." I thanked her, ended the call, and sat there in my little kitchen with the sound of the radiator clicking behind me. The same table where I ate every morning now felt like the center of something bigger. The sale of that house wasn't about money. I didn't need the money. Not anymore. It was about the truth. That house had been my sister's. I had cleaned every window in it with my own hands when she passed, fixed every leaking pipe, and spent 4 years making sure it stayed in good shape. When Mark and Emily needed help, I didn't ask questions. I gave them keys. And now they were going to find out those keys had never been theirs. I didn't know exactly when they'd be notified, but I had a feeling it would be soon. Andrea said the process had started, that they'd be served by courier, not a sheriff, just someone formal enough to make it real. They wouldn't understand at first. I knew that, but I wanted to see it. I needed to see their faces, not to gloat, not to laugh, just to make it real for myself. So I waited. 2 days later, I put on my coat, the same gray one Andrea had ordered for me in my size. And I took the train to the next town over. The train ride was quiet. I sat near the back, looking out the window at the streets I used to walk with Mark when he was still in school. When I got off, I walked to the diner 2 blocks from the house. 'Twas the same one where I had waited when Emily threw me out. Same green booths, same flickering menu board. I ordered a tea and took the seat by the window where I could see the corner of their block. I waited. And at 3:17 p.m., a gray sedan pulled up to the curb in front of the house. A man in a blue windbreaker stepped out with a folder in hand. I didn't blink. I didn't sip my tea. I just watched as he walked up the steps and rang the doorbell. It was Mark who opened the door. I saw the hesitation in his posture, the way his hand rested on the frame. The man handed him the folder and said something short. Mark nodded slowly, then looked down at the papers. Emily appeared in the doorway a moment later. They both stood there, flipping pages, their expressions going from confusion to something harder to read. Disbelief, maybe? Maybe panic. I leaned back in the booth. They read for a long time. Emily started talking fast. I couldn't hear her, of course, but I knew that tone. She waved her hands, paced across the porch. Mark looked frozen. Eventually, the man in the windbreaker left. The car pulled away. They went back inside and shut the door. I finished my tea. It was strange. I thought I'd feel something sharper, some rush. But all I felt was a quiet kind of finality that night. I went home and made soup. The next day, Andrea called again. They've reached out, she said. Mark left a voicemail on the firm's office line. Nothing hostile, just confused. I asked, did he mention me? No, she said. He just said he didn't understand what was going on and asked if someone could call him back. I didn't. Good, I said. I didn't want them to know it was me. Not yet. They would. Find out eventually. They'd start digging and realize the trust name connected to me somehow. But by then, it wouldn't matter. The sale would be done. The title would be transferred. And they'd be out. Andrea kept handling everything. Meanwhile, I kept living. My small life. I started going to the community center more often. I helped fold blankets, organize canned food, and listen to women who talked a little too fast after holding in their stories for too long. Most of them didn't know anything about me. It's just that I was quiet, steady, and showed up. There was a woman named Janine, about my age, who used to be a nurse until her kids stopped calling. One day she sat beside me and asked where I was from. I told her I used to live a few towns away. She said, "Funny how fast people forget what you've done for them, isn't it?" I nodded. That was all we said that day. On Sunday afternoon, I walked to the bakery downstairs and bought 2 cinnamon rolls. It felt ridiculous, like a splurge. But I ate one while sitting on the windowsill in my apartment and thought about how long it had been since I had tasted something warm without. Rushing, then my phone, the new one Andrea gave me, rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, the message came through. I pressed play. It was Emily. Her voice had that sharp, defensive tone I remembered too well. I don't know what kind of sick game this is, but we got a notice saying the house isn't ours, that we have to vacate. This must be some mistake. Call us back if you need to explain this, whoever you are. She didn't say my name, not once. She didn't say mom. She didn't even say mother. Just whoever you are. I deleted the message that night. I couldn't sleep right away. I kept thinking about that phrase. Whoever you are. Maybe she didn't know anymore. Maybe they had convinced themselves I was someone else, someone who didn't matter, who didn't count, who didn't have a voice. They were going to learn otherwise. Andrea said the closing would be in 2 weeks. After that, Mark and Emily would receive final notification to vacate within 30 days. I wouldn't push them, I wouldn't scream, but when they walked out of that house for the last time, I would know something they never saw coming. I was never the one who needed them. They were the ones who needed me, and I was gone. It took them 4 days to call again. This time, it was Mark. Andrea had warned me that after the shock wore off, they'd start reaching out more, trying to negotiate, trying to guilt me, trying to spin the whole thing as some misunderstanding. She was right. The second voicemail came late Thursday night. I was already in bed reading an article in one of the magazines from the community center. The phone lit up. I didn't recognize the number, but I didn't need to. I waited until morning to listen. Mark's voice was quiet, controlled. Hi, if this message reaches whoever is handling the property at 908 Bayview, this is Mark Whitmore. There's been some sort of mix-up. We've lived in this house for over 6 years. My mother used to own it, and we were under the impression everything was stable. Please, if this is a clerical issue, call me back. Clerical issue. I replayed that part twice. He still hadn't figured it out. I didn't respond. Andrea confirmed that the sale had passed the final inspection. The buyer was moving quickly. The closing date was set. Once that happened, the eviction notice would be legally binding. It wasn't dramatic, it was procedural. All they'd receive was a stamped envelope and a deadline. Andrea made sure of. She called me the following afternoon. They've retained counsel. She said, I stayed silent, but the attorney they hired contacted our office for clarification. Once I explained the chain of ownership, the original title, and the trust, there was nothing he could contest. They never filed a deed. They have no claim. Their attorney backed off. So what happens next? We finish closing. Again, 30 days. That night, I sat on my small sofa and stared at the envelope Andrea had mailed me a week before. Inside was the full set of sale documents. I didn't open them at first. I had signed what needed to be signed. I hadn't wanted to look at the final numbers. It wasn't about that, but I opened it now. The house sold for $276,000. That was more than fair. I remembered Mark complaining 5 years ago that it was old and small and not worth much anyway. It's funny how quickly value changes when someone else holds the pen. 2 days later, Emily left another voicemail. I knew it was her before the first word came out. The tone, the breath. You're disgusting, she said. I don't know who you think you are, but this is evil. Just so you know, there's a family here. A child lives in this house. And now you're trying to throw us onto the street like garbage. If this is about money, we don't have it. If this is about revenge, congratulations, you win. She hung up. No apology, no acknowledgement, just accusations. There was no child in that house. Mark and Emily didn't have kids, I always said. They were waiting until they had the money or too busy for that kind of responsibility. I used to nod and smile when they said that, telling myself it wasn't my place. But deep down, I had always wanted to be a grandmother. Now, I didn't think about that anymore. They were trying every card. And they were running out of hands to play. I spent most of that week avoiding my phone. I went to the community center. Each morning, helped sort canned goods, peeled potatoes, and talked with Janine about old music we liked. She told me once that she used to sing in a choir, back when her knees worked and her kids still called on weekends. You miss them? I asked. She shrugged. I used to. Not anymore. I don't like people who only show up when they want something. Understood that too well. The following Monday, a letter came in the mail. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. I opened it on the kitchen table, slowly. It was from Mark. No greeting. No mom. Just a block of text scribbled in blue ink. We don't know what's happening. Emily thinks you're behind it. I told her that's crazy. You wouldn't do this. You were always generous, always trying to help. We just want a chance to fix. Whatever this is, please call. If this is your doing, please reconsider. I don't know where we'll go. I folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, and set it in the drawer under the sink. I didn't need to read it again. That night, I had trouble falling asleep. Not because of guilt, but because my body still hadn't adjusted to peace. Years of walking on eggshells had conditioned me to wait for the knock, the insult, the manipulation, and now there was silence. Uncomfortable at first, but it was getting easier. 2 weeks later, the closing finalized. Andrea called again. It's over. You'll receive confirmation by mail. The buyer is arranging for the eviction notice to be delivered. We gave your son's attorney the timeline, so they've been informed. What did he say? He asked who initiated the sale. I didn't answer. Will they find out? Eventually, yes. It won't matter. The new owner will have full legal authority. They can't stop it. That Friday, I stood in line at the post office with a small package in hand, not to send to Mark or Emily. This was for a local nonprofit. A donation. Quiet. Anonymous. I didn't need a plaque or a photo in the newsletter. I just wanted to do something real, something no one could twist or weaponize. The next message from Emily came 2 days after the eviction notice. You're going to rot for this. If you think this is over, it's not. You're nothing. A bitter, petty old woman who can't stand to see others happy. We opened our home to you and you paid us back by destroying us. You're disgusting. That word again? Disgusting? It didn't sting. I saved the voicemail and forwarded it to Andrea. She added it to the file in case they tried anything else. That night I went to bed early. No wine, no television, just sleep. They thought I was cruel, but they never once considered why I was quiet all those years. Why I cooked, cleaned, kept the house running, paid for their groceries, handed over my car when theirs broke down, stayed silent when Emily insulted me in front of friends. They thought silence meant weakness. It didn't. It meant I was taking notes. The official move-out notice gave them 30 days. I didn't expect them to use those days wisely. Andrea told me. The buyer's representative drove by the house 2 weeks before the deadline and said it looked like no one was packing. No moving boxes, no trucks, no signs of anything changing. There. Probably hoping it'll all just go away, she said. I nodded. That sounded like them. It wasn't until the 3rd week that I started to hear noise again. This time from mutual contacts, people from the old church I used to attend, former neighbors who still talk to my cousin in town. Quiet messages made their way through the grapevine. I heard your son and his wife are being evicted. They live in your sister's old house. I thought they owned it. I didn't reply to any of it. I let the silence work for me. On the Monday before the move-out deadline, I went back to that same diner where I had waited after being thrown out. It felt strange being back, knowing what was coming, but it also gave me peace. I sat in the same booth near the window. I ordered black coffee and toast. At exactly 10:15 a.m., a blue pickup pulled up in front of the house. The buyer's property manager stepped out with a clipboard and walked to the front door from the diner. I watched it all. The door opened slowly. Mark stood there in sweatpants, barefoot, holding a phone in one hand. He looked thinner. His hair was a little grayer than before. Emily appeared behind him, arms crossed, mouth already moving fast. I couldn't hear them, but I could tell by the way her hand waved toward the yard. The way Mark's head dropped, and the way the manager stood calmly and didn't flinch. It wasn't going well. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. Finally, the manager handed them a set of printed documents, turned around, and walked back to his truck. Emily slammed the door. They had been given a firm deadline, 72 hours, to vacate, or the next step would involve court enforcement. It wasn't an empty threat. Andrea made sure everything was airtight. They had no legal defense left. The papers were clear. The next morning, they started loading things. First came the plastic bins, the kind people buy when they're in denial about how much space they really need. Then came the black garbage bags, dragged down the steps like leftovers. A small moving van showed up. They didn't have much. That surprised me. Or maybe it didn't. All those years in that house and they never invested in it. Never cared for it like a home. I was the one who cleaned the gutters, paid for the new water heater, replaced the shingles when the roof leaked. They never painted, never landscaped. They lived in it, but it never belonged to them. Not in effort, not in care, and definitely not in name. I watched from across the street. Not hiding, but not obvious either. I stood under a tree, a hood up, holding a plain tote bag and a coffee. At one point, Emily came out carrying a large canvas she used to hang in the hallway. She paused on the porch and looked around like she was checking for cameras or neighbors. Maybe she knew someone was watching. Maybe she knew it was me. Mark came out next with a box marked kitchen. He moved slower than I remembered. They loaded for another hour, then they were gone. Just like that, no tearful goodbye to the porch, no last photo by the door, no gratitude, no apology. Later that day, Andrea forwarded me a message from the buyer. Property is now empty. Lock changed. Transfer complete. I printed it and folded it into my notebook. The next morning, I walked to the bakery downstairs and bought a loaf of rye bread. I sliced it fresh, made toast with butter, sat by my window. It had been exactly 73 days since Emily said, "I don't need a sick mother-in-law. Get out." 73 days since they handed me $4 and closed the door. I didn't cry, didn't celebrate. I just breathed. That same week, I went to the local credit union and opened a new savings account. I didn't need to, but I wanted something with my name on it. My real name, not the trust, just me. The teller asked, "Do you have any employment? Income?" I smiled. "No, just retirement funds and a little support." She didn't ask more back at the apartment. I finally opened the second drawer of the dresser, the one I had avoided since moving in. Inside were the photo albums I had taken with me that day. I didn't grab much when I left, but I had those. I flipped through the pages. Old birthday parties, Mark's 5th grade graduation. A photo of Emily and Mark in the backyard the year they moved into the house. I remembered taking that picture. She had a glass of lemonade in one hand and was laughing. I stared at it for a long time. Then I closed the album and placed it back in the drawer. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was free. Let them believe what they want. That I'm heartless. That I plotted some grand scheme. That I destroyed their lives. I didn't. They did. I just took my name back off the doormat. 3 weeks had passed since Mark and Emily left the house. I hadn't heard from either of them since. No new voicemails, no letters, no attempts to show up or explain themselves. The silence didn't bother me. In fact, it gave me space to think clearly. Probably for the first time in years, Andrea had already transferred the sale proceeds from the house into the trust. The balance sat untouched. Aside from the modest donation I made to the community kitchen and a small amount I used to furnish my apartment, I didn't need a lot, didn't want a lot, but I wasn't finished yet. There was still one thing I wanted to do. On a Tuesday morning, I took the train downtown and walked to a plain brick building with no signs outside. Just a buzzer on the door and a note taped to the glass. By appointment only. Local Women's Resource Fund. I had called ahead. They were expecting me. Inside, a young woman named Lisa greeted me. She offered coffee, which I declined, and led me into a room with 3 chairs and a table with some pamphlets on it. She didn't ask about my story. She didn't need to. Had already told her everything over the phone in plain terms. I want to help women who've been pushed out by their families, I had said. Older women, grandmothers, women people stop listening to. Lisa said she understood. Now, face to face, I handed her the envelope I had brought. It had 1 sheet inside, and it listed the name of the foundation I wanted to create, the amount of money I was allocating to it, and a single condition: the name of the fund would be the Eleanor Trust. Eleanor was my mother's name. She died in a small hospital room. Nobody visited often enough. She knew what it was like to be forgotten by the people she fed and raised. The fund would provide short-term housing support for women over 60 who had been displaced by family members. No long application processes, no complicated interviews. Just a clean bed, a safe room, and time to regroup. Lisa read the page, looked up, and said, "You've never had anything like this before." I nodded. That's the point. I didn't ask for recognition. I didn't want my name on a plaque or brochure. I just wanted the money to go where it mattered. To people who'd been told, just like me, that they were too sick, too old, too inconvenient, the paperwork would take a few days. Lisa promised to keep me informed. That night, I stopped by the bakery on the way home and bought 2 butter rolls. I sat in my apartment with the TV off and watched the light shift through the window. I didn't think about the past. I didn't even think about Mark or Emily. They had chosen their path. Now I was walking mine. 3 days later, received a letter in my mailbox. No return address. It's just my first name written in rushed handwriting. Inside was a folded note. No greeting. Number. Signature dot, just 3 lines. We found a rental. It's small. She's not talking to me much. I don't know what to say to you, but I'm sorry. It was Mark's writing. I read it twice, then folded it back and placed it in the bottom drawer of the nightstand. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Sorry. Didn't rewind anything. It didn't make up for the night he stood there, eyes blank, while his wife told me to leave with $4 in my hand. It didn't erase the cold stares or the years of letting Emily speak for both of them. He wasn't sorry until the furniture was gone and the porch was empty. Let him sit with that. Let him learn. The following week, Andrea called again. I've received final confirmation. The Eleanor Trust is legally active. I thanked her and asked her to send the documents to the library I now visited each Tuesday. I didn't want the mail at home. Not because I was hiding, but because it was over. I didn't want my quiet space disturbed. At the library that afternoon, I sat with Janine again. She was helping stack returned books. "You look taller today," she said. I smiled. Maybe I just stopped leaning. She didn't ask what that meant. She didn't need to. Sometimes the people who barely know you understand more than the ones who share your blood. On my way out, I paused at the bulletin board near the entrance. There was a new flyer posted with a red border and big black text. Emergency housing now available for women 60+ facing family displacement. I didn't touch it. I just looked. Then I walked outside and felt the cold air on my face. Not sharp, not biting. Just clear. For the first time in years, felt like I belonged exactly where I was. Not in someone else's house. Not in someone else's story. And definitely not waiting for someone else's permission. They thought throwing me out would break me, but it did. Something else. It made me realize I was never theirs to keep in the first place. And now I had something they'd never touch, not the money, not the peace, and definitely not my name.